Back by popular demand is our pre-Climate Week podcast. We have two very, very special and popular guests. Our first is Nick Van Osdol, the creator of the Keep Cool newsletter and podcast. Then we've got Steven Zhang, maker of the ultimate climate job board, Climate Tech List, as well as his new project, Interconnection.fyi.
5 years ago, this wasn't really a thing, right? And now I think we're at an inflection point where in a few years, we might be calling this something else, right?
This is the place where if you've been in the ecosystem for even a year, you probably know a lot of people. Try to meet up with the people that are going. I think those are like the most valuable sort of interactions.
I think last year was a big year because 2023 felt like the explosion. 2024 was kind of like the calming.
But the dilemma is the majority of the actual needle movers are people coming from other industries that are not exactly climate industries. Job seekers in many cases at Climate Week are not the people that you really want to hire. Hey there, Silas here with Clean Techies. Back by popular demand is our, drumroll please, pre-Climate Week podcast, where we share our advice on how to navigate New York Climate Week and get the most out of it. But what's different this time is we have two very, very special and popular guests. Our first is Nick Van Osdol, the creator of the Keep Cool newsletter and podcast. His newsletter is read by over 17,000 people last time I checked, and Nick is also a venture partner at Climate Capital, an early-stage climate fund. Then we've got Steven Zhang, maker of the ultimate climate job board, Climate Tech List, as well as his new project, Interconnection.fyi. And on top of all of this, he has a really cool directory of people who are attending Climate Week, so you can kind of find your friends and make sure you connect while you're there. So they've got some pretty cool projects. And then, of course, Somil doing investing at Schmidt Futures, and myself recruiting top talent for clean tech startups at Earth Tech Talent. And in today's pre-Climate Week episode, we're going over the following topics. What are we expecting at New York Climate Week in 2025, given the completely different vibes this year than last year, given the current administration? We talk about best practices and how to get the most out of it. We talk about what to avoid, what not to do. And then what events are we really, really looking forward to? And finally, what topics that we think are really important for us to really, as participants, to discuss and to bring up during the week. It was a lot of fun to make this, so be sure to share it with all of your friends attending Climate Week so you guys can get the most out of it. It is a lot of things going on, and it's a big opportunity to really meet people and get a lot of value out of this gathering where so many people are coming together. So do not waste this opportunity. And also, last thing before I let you go into the episode, do not forget to register for our live podcast, How to Win in the Anti-Climate Era. The event takes place on Tuesday of Climate Week. That's September 23rd from 2 to 4:30 p.m. Space is super limited, so register today. Link is in the description along with all of the other links that get mentioned in today's episode. All right, enjoy it. All right, everybody, welcome to the Climate Week pregame episode with Nick and Steven, our special guests. How is everybody doing?
All good on my end. Stoked to be here.
I'm surprised that we could get this group together, honestly. Everybody's all over the place, super busy, so I'm really glad that on this Friday afternoon or evening for Steven, we've been able to pull everybody together. So what we're going to do today, everybody, is we did this last year. We're just trying to give everybody a little bit of a heads up or prep for Climate Week in New York City. It's obviously totally chaotic, so we're veterans of the space, I guess you would say. So we're just going to give you a little bit of our 2 cents. So we'll start with what we are expecting this week at Climate Week. It's going to be a very different year at Climate Week, obviously. So let's start with Nick. What are your thoughts?
This year for Climate Week, I think, content and topically wise, based on everything I've seen this year and certainly the last 6 months, there's going to be probably a lot of discussion about U.S. federal policy, the predominance of which could be construed as headwinds. I think the Trump administration has certainly made effort to make as much noise as possible about the extent to which it's going to, hamper certainly especially wind development in the United States, and to other degrees also just renewable development in general, and taking away the EV tax credit, all that jazz. There's innumerable policies individually that anyone could talk about. So I think there's going to be a lot of discussion around like, okay, what's the fallout of this? How do we keep going? I think most people will, try to spin it optimistically. And I agree that there, is all the reason as ever to keep going with business as usual to the extent possible. But I think that'll get a lot of attention. And I think, it'll be interesting to see to what extent that sort of like dampens the mood, probably almost certainly compared to last year or 2 years ago. It's almost like, to what degree are people going to be able to convince themselves that like, yeah, we're still going to be fine? And I have more to say about that later, but this is we could save that. I think there'll be a lot of discussion about AI and data center demand and sort of all of the different opportunities as well as strain that creates. That's been like probably one of the biggest stories that everyone's talked about almost ad nauseum all year, which is good. It's a very real story, and there's a lot of genuine opportunity that comes out of it. I do sort of, and we can talk about this more later too, but I hope that it doesn't sort of just like crowd out every other meaningful discussion that's worth having.
Yeah, 100%. Steven, what do you think?
I have a couple thoughts. One is probably more focus on state policy, just drawing from my experience earlier this year at various energy or clean tech conferences I've gone to, talking about local policy, starting with the big states, New York, California, Texas, whatever. And then a couple other thoughts, like this year, maybe last year there's been this focus on grid tech, probably comes in different forms, that specific phrase, but sort of taking a more like technology neutral approach to like building out, capacity in the grid, but at least based on current trends, most of that will be renewables. And maybe that's just sort of like a framing thing for various reasons. And then one other thought could be interesting. I have some friends from Europe and acquaintances that like come every year, and this year is interesting because they're like American firms trying to either expand or shift their business focus to Europe. If you're doing offshore wind, would be a good example of doing that. So in New York's on the eastern side, right, of the U.S., like it's like typically where like European businesses is like much closer to East Coast and West Coast. So I think that'll be interesting, and it's obviously Climate Week's done during UNGA, UN General Assembly week, and so there's already like a lot of people internationally here.
Yeah,
I'll leave it at that.
So, Somya, what do you got? What do you got for us?
I think there are two things that are actually going to pop up quite a bit more on the technology side. So one is adaptation and resilience. That's been a big rise, especially in the past year, 2 years. But I think for the first time, it's kind of eclipsed in terms of buying power, in the sense that certain major corporates are starting to put money towards it. I think that's usually where the events follow, is where can you get sponsors. It's an interesting dynamic. So I would say people should be sort of ready for a more than normal overpopulation of conversations about resilience and adaptation. The other is nuclear. I think there's been a lot of advancements in nuclear that have gone under the radar in the past couple of months. And I know for a fact, through friends, there's a lot of lobbying going on the Hill for nuclear to be in more of the agendas. So especially as we think about what kind of policy discussions are going to be happening, and I think that's one of the great things about New York Climate Week is the different types of perspectives people bring together. I think we're going to hear a lot about what things can actually end up on the national agenda and what things are, for lack of a better term, in the pockets of oil and gas. And I would expect that that's going to be sort of more forefront this year, since we're really thinking about how do we work with the current tailwinds and headwinds. I mean, more headwinds than tailwinds, but how do we work in that ecosystem?
Interesting. It seems like we all have pretty different takes on what we expect as the main topic. For me, my biggest thing, and just in terms of what I expect, is really just a little bit less action than last year. Especially, I think last year just felt like an absolute explosion of activity. There's so much stuff going on, but I think that because we have a number of people who were really climate tourists at the time, I think a lot of those people are gone and they don't realize that there's still a party going on, so to say. They kind of think, oh, it's all done, it's cooked, so they're gone, and those tourists are gone, which actually will be, I think, pretty helpful for the real builders in the space to continue having actual good conversations, hopefully getting some fundraising conversations done, etc. I also do anticipate people from a new sort of crew. I think that even with the event that we're hosting, there's this kind of new group of people that really fall into the energy abundance camp of like A16Z in general. And I think a bunch of those people have ended up in the climate bucket now, and they're actually winning a lot. So I'm interested to see how they fit in with the typical climate folks, and see if that brings any new dynamics. Any final thoughts on any of the things that have been shared in this section, guys?
Two thoughts. One is, Silas, you bring up this like energy abundance group of people. I think A very helpful framework for me. There's this writer, Nadia Asparova. I think she was like the first writer at Substack, or one of the first employees of Substack. She has this really interesting sociological writing, I guess, on the archetypes of people who work in climate. It's from like a long time ago, like 2 or 3 years ago. I made like a little quiz from it a few years ago, but it is important to think about, like, it is the climate, whatever, people working on climate. It's not like one cohesive group. There are many different groups, sometimes with a little bit contradictory aims, right? If you put a degrowther and energy maximalist, right, they have some very contradictory views, right? And that's one of the really interesting parts of having a huge event like this. So just want to throw that out there. And two, really quickly, most Climate Weeks, obviously we're talking sort of about what trends are happening. There's a lot of people who go for job search reasons. Silas, you probably know this as well.
Mhm.
Like for me, climate tech list, whatever. And if you look at sort of like white collar job search in the U.S., job numbers in the U.S. right now, it's like arguably as bad as like 2022. Just looking at the raw numbers and stuff. So I think that'll be kind of an interesting time, because 2022 was the macro environment on climate was from different reasons, right? Anyways, that's it.
Well, if it's in response, I think one thing on the, like, where does the abundance agenda come from? I think, and this is coming from a sort of a former investor too, I think funds are going to be way less important this year. I think there is the sort of belief also, if you just look at the way that funds were raised and deployed, that funds just have way less dry powder to put out there. I also think that means that there's less meaning for those platforms. And I think that's one of the reasons why you see more off the beaten path people coming in. I think it's also because they genuinely, the value is shifting. People who can actually sort of like think about and make commitments and look for new opportunities, rather than a lot of the funds who I've either deployed all their funding or maybe are not raising next funds. I think it's going to be an interesting dynamic to see what Climate Week is like when the funds are playing a much less central role. I don't think that's like fully mapped out in terms of how the events are being hosted, but I think there may be some interesting dynamics between the conversations people are having, which is when you're talking to a fund, what can you realistically expect from them? I don't know.
Yeah, I think, we're already sort of into the meat of the conversation here, but to build off of everything that you all just said, I think what's interesting about this Climate Week is, first of all, 5 years ago, this like wasn't really a thing, right? This was not something that like people would host a podcast to be like, we need to like have a rundown of what's going to happen at this Climate Week because it's such a big deal. Like that was not a conversation people were having even 5 years ago. And now I think we're at an inflection point where in a few years we might be calling this something else, right? Like Climate Week, climate doesn't do justice to all the different types of conversations that will happen over this week, right? Like Sunil, to your point earlier, like there will almost certainly be a lot of discussion about adaptation, and sure, that ladders up to the climate bucket, but it's a lot more specific than what climate would tell you. And to your point, Silas, like the abundance agenda, like that's a word that has a lot of pull and traction now, and like might end up being one of the main refrains that the Democratic Party of the United States like reorganizes around in 2026 and 2028 to like have a compelling counter to the Republican Party's platform. So some of this is like actually like almost like evolution of branding for the space as a whole. I wouldn't be surprised at all if in like 3 or 4 years we don't call it Climate Week anymore,
Yeah, I would definitely not be surprised. I think that without giving away too much of what we're planning to talk about at our event, I think that's the general idea too is that the people who are winning are in many cases not appearing to be climate companies on the surface, right? So I think it's good. I think it's a pretty diverse set of topics that we expect here. I am really fascinated by your guys' opinions there. That's I hadn't expected some of those things. So let's move on to, I guess, in terms of managing yourself during Climate Week. Obviously, it's a spread across this entire city of New York. Well, mostly it's all over the place. But what are you guys' kind of core best practices during Climate Week? We'll start with Steven, then go to Nick, and then this Somil, and then I'll wrap it up.
Yeah, I guess my first suggestion is sort of like, how do you think about conferences in general, and sort of these like mega conferences or conferences of conferences like Climate Week? I really think about this idea of a Schelling point, Scheling, or focal point. You can look up the Wikipedia article. This whole idea of like, okay, if communication breaks down and you have to go to one place to like coordinate with your group. In our case, it's like people working in clean tech, climate tech, energy tech, whatever. Where do you go? And for this week, the week climate week, it's New York City, right? So really just lean into that idea of like, this is the place where if you've been in the ecosystem for even a year, you probably know a lot of people. Like, try to meet up with the people that are going. And yeah, I guess we can briefly talk about it later, but that's why I kind of made these tools and others too, for not just coordinating on events, but also like who else is going. Cause I think those are like the most valuable sort of interactions. Like, Silas, I got to know you well from Climate Week 2 years ago, I think. Even though we've been like chatting on LinkedIn for a long time before that. I'll leave it at that.
All right, Nick.
Yeah, I don't have a massive amount more to add what Steven already offered. I think, there's a lot of amazing events. You'll have no shortage of choice insofar as like there's probably like 4 cool conversations happening in, 8 blocks of Manhattan at any given point during Climate Week. I very much focus on what Steven ended with, which is to say, at the most basic level, it's also just a week where a lot of people that aren't necessarily always in New York are in New York. And I live in New York, at least most of the time, when I'm not running around the world. And so I very much over index on like, okay, who is going to be here that is not normally in New York otherwise? And who can I like grab coffee or at the beginning of the day, or a drink with at the end of the day, before they're whisked away to like 10 other speaking engagements.
Yeah.
Basically, like, who have I already traded 15 emails with and had like 3 Zoom calls with, who is awesome that I've never met in person.
Hey, founders, if you're hiring, I've got a special offer for you. For those of you who do not know, to pay the bills, I run a search firm called Earth Tech Talent. That's Earth with no A. We specialize in placing top sales and engineering talent at early stage clean tech startups in the United States. And we do it for way, way less than traditional search firms. I've actually been working as a recruiter for over 5 years in clean tech and have made over 70 placements, from the CTO of IPA Power, a Blackstone-backed energy developer, to most of the founding team at ChargeScape, a managed charging software joint venture between Honda, Ford, BMW, and Nissan. Early stage clean tech startups can't afford to not have the right talent, but they also cannot afford to use a traditional search firm for their recruiting needs. That's where we can help. We charge as low as 12% of first year base salary, and this is compared to the typical 20 to 30% that most firms charge. So you can get an expert in the space at a price that does not break the bank. If you'd like to learn more, check out our website, earthtechtalent.com. That's, again, Earth with no A. And we really value transparency, so our pricing is publicly available on the website. If you're looking for support, book a call today. My calendar link is in the description, and be sure to reference this ad for $1,000 off of your first search. All right, back to the show.
Totally agreed on that one. And I think for me, I've started to notice, I think last year was a big year because 2023 felt like the explosion. 2024 was kind of like the calming. And you kind of saw more side events pop up. People kind of knew who was going to be in town a little bit more reliably. So I feel like you saw more grouping happening. I would expect that to happen again this year, except probably a little more streamlined. So I find that people are probably going to be gathering a lot more selectively. And that's not to say that it's based on any sort of exclusionary properties. I just think people kind of understand that if they don't be selective, although they'll be dragged to many different events at many different times. So for me, I kind of follow the same practice, which is I try to think about, okay, not just who are 1 or 2 people, but what is the grouping of people that's likely going to be somewhere, and focus a lot of my energy on that, because it's really hard to track exactly who's going to be where. But I think if you pick the right centers of gravity, it's much more, for lack of a better term, efficient use of your time. So for me, I'm going to be spending a lot of time thinking about, okay, where do I want to, if I'm picking one place to spend the most amount of time in a day, where do I want that to be? And everything else can kind of be flexible on top of that.
Yeah, a bit of planning out your routes, I guess you could say. Yeah, I think for me, most of mine are here very like tangibly focused in terms of whoever's attending, regardless of what you're up to. Before you get there, make sure you have a very clear objective that you're trying to get out of Climate Week. Does that mean you're trying to meet investors? Are you trying to get a job? Are you trying to land a couple partnerships? Like really, really get clear on your objective. because when people ask you like what's going on, you need to have a clear objective. There's so many people I meet as a recruiter where it's like they give you 2-3 things that they're up to, and it's like, okay, well, what really matters to you? And now I can't remember because I met 100 people during the week in person for coffees. How am I supposed to remember exactly what's going on? But if you have a really clear ask, it makes it easier for everybody, and it makes you more memorable. I would also say pick one core event per day that's really valuable to you and focus on getting the value out of that. Don't go to an event for 20 minutes, hear a couple things and leave. If it's the best event for you to attend all day. Really get to know the people that are core for what you're working on, and really spend time to just understand, the core things and the core takeaways from that. This kind of plays into that too. Is schedule time for follow-ups, or breaks between your events so that you can get your follow-ups done now, or at least write your emails that will be sent out the next week. Because I cannot tell you how many times we've met a ton of people. There's really great things that are said, and I even have it in my notes app. But then the next week comes, and I'm just back to real life, and I'm trying to catch up on the other emails that are for work related things, and I have no time to reply to those people. So I spent this entire week meeting people, getting some really good in-person interactions, and then it just kind of goes out the window. So you're only going to be able to have a handful of really positive outcomes. So focus on the things that really matter, the people and the events that really matter, and then also schedule time for your follow-ups. I'd recommend just voice note, at least draft out your follow-up emails right then and there, or right after the event, so that way you can send them later on.
Two quick things, real quick. Well, one's a fun one. I learned this year that people will come up to you if you have like fun shirts or hats about the industry. I had this hat that was like from Energy Hub, iHeart VPPs, and like I went to I think it was DC Climate Week or something, and everyone just come up to me and like talk to me directly from that. And I actually, yeah, so maybe you could find some swag that like fits your sort of lane exactly, and you might, in terms of meeting new people, they might come towards you. And then and so I'm looking into this idea. What do you think of this idea? And it's a great time to do that, because that's one of the benefits of like in-person interaction. I think you get more candid takes.
100%. That's a really good point.
I would really quickly just add, like, if you've already gone to 2 events and had 2 coffees, and you're like thinking about what to do with the rest of your Thursday afternoon, and you don't live in New York City, like, go to the Met for an hour and go to like the 5th floor of the Met and just like be immersed in some of the world's greatest art, or whatever it is, right? Like, don't forget that you're in one of the coolest like cultural epicenters of the world, and you don't have to do exclusively like climate stuff. It also is just like a better story for when you go to the happy hour after. They'll be like, oh, what event were you at? And you're like, oh, actually I just took like 75 minutes to go to like a really sweet museum.
This is why we have to have Nick on every episode, dude. We're gonna have to make you like a regular guest.
Call me whenever. I'll say no often, but when I've got the time.
One thing someone did to me last year that I thought was brilliant was, depending on your space situation or whatever, if you feel like there's quite a few people that are in New York at a certain amount of time, and it's like later in the week, if everyone's still around, I found that someone actually invited me to like something at their place, and they just brought sort of like a bunch of friends that they have together. And it was much more low key, much more, just like informal. And I found that the people that were actually there actually was the closest with coming out of the week. Like I actually got to know them a little bit more. And for the person, I found that it was all people that were probably either relevant to them or they got along with. So if you have the capacity or whatever, feel free. You don't have to do anything big. But in the same way that people host events, I think it's not a bad idea to think about what is a way in which I can bring people together that might be, either good to talk to each other or that I would want to talk with more.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I would say, like, yeah, you don't even have to live in New York. Like, you could just be the catalyst for, like, hey, I'm at this bar. If everything else is way too crowded for you and, like, 5 people want to come just jam, that's a great way to do it.
Yeah, pro tip, try to find the quiet bars, because otherwise your voice will be shot so quickly. Oh, man, that's the worst part. But awesome. I think that's really, really good. Let's talk about things to avoid or what not to do. I'll go first, and then we'll go from there. My first take is do not overload on events. I mentioned this earlier. Just pick one really key event. If you try to do everything, you're going to get zero value out of any of it. Number 2, don't ask right away when you're meeting people. Again, especially if it's a more transactional type of event where you're not going to have a lot of time to meet them. do not focus on your ask first. Try to really understand what they're up to and get to know how you can be helpful to them, because there's a good chance that one or two people in your network that are relatively close to you, or at least weak ties, can be helpful for them. So figure out what they're looking to do and see if you can make intros to be really helpful. And then if you do have an ask, make it a clear ask, so that when they do ask you back, you have a clear ask for them, and then you can go from there. I think that's the my key points on what to avoid. Let's go, Steven.
Yeah, I think I'll keep it short. I think doesn't happen too often, but I have had some friends. They attend the talks and then they just leave. Like it's for, the content could be really good in person, but don't just do the content. Like part of it's like talking to the people afterwards. So really highly encourage you to like think about it from a networking point of view. That's all I'll say.
All right, let's go, Nick.
I don't think I have a ton to add. I mean, not spreading yourself too thin is huge. I think there is a scenario where, I'll just frame it as myself. There's a scenario where I could go to 15 events and get very little out of it. And there's a scenario where I could have 3 coffees and go to 1 event and like barely act like there's some major week going on and getting a lot out of it. So yeah, keep it simple. Quantity or quality over quantity is definitely my personal MO and something I'd recommend to most.
I think I'm probably a bit more antagonistic of the week here. For me, I've started to really avoid events where I can't answer for myself who is going to be there, right? Because there's some of these events that are very general. They kind of maybe have this like broader value that seems interesting, but I'm going and I myself, when I ask myself the question, like, what am I going to learn from this? I have no idea, right? Because learning isn't just from the panel. Oftentimes it's not really from the panel. It's from like who's going to be there, who are you going to meet, and who are you going to talk to. If I can't answer for myself, what am I going to get out of it? Then other people are probably asking the same question, and I'm not as likely to get sort of meaningful conversations or meaningful connections out of it. So I find that events that are more curated, a little bit more specific, a little bit more like well-designed, and not trying to catch everyone, are actually some of the biggest the best events and the biggest gains from the week. So I try to do that gut check for myself whenever I'm looking at an event, which, why would I come here? Why would anyone come here?
Yeah, it's a good point. So let's talk about events that we're looking forward to. Nick, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. Well, I'm hosting a happy hour with Louis Woodall from Climate Proof, and so that'll be a great chance to talk about adaptation, as Samuel called out at the beginning, because that's what Louis' media property is all about. It'll also be a good chance to just hang out and have interesting conversations and meet cool people, because anytime I host something, I very much deprivilege the like panel conversation. I'm like, let's just talk and hang out, and it doesn't even have to be all about climate. And I can send the link to register for that, obviously, so we can drop it in the show notes. And then sticking with the adaptation vein, I will be hosting or moderating a panel on adaptation alongside Everett Sanderson, who's a good friend of mine, at CityLight Venture Capital, and super happy. They might be a little more tight with the registrations for that. They could already be at cap. That should be a good conversation about sort of intersection of adaptation plays and venture capital, and we'll certainly put the info for that in as well.
Awesome. Steven?
Beyond that, just to not only talk my own book, I still want to find, I should add that I want to find more events that are focused on greenhouse gases beyond carbon dioxide, for sure, methane, nitrous oxide, what have you. I'd be super interested to see who's hosting stuff in that vein.
All right, Steven, what do you got?
I'll answer this question indirectly. You should check out the sort of event resources on climatetechlist.com, which is the site I run. In particular, there's 2 sort of people-centric tools. There's an attendee directory. You can fill out your profile, and then I think right now there's like 100, 200 people who filled it out. Last year we had like 300 by the end. It's a really quick way to see like who might be sort of overlapping with what you're looking for. Right? Have everyone fill out what they're looking for and what they can offer as well. And then also there's a LinkedIn event which you can RSVP on, and the goal there is it gets your network to RSVP, and then you can look through the attendees who are first connections with you and sort of practice what we all talked about 20 minutes ago of like reaching out and doing those one-on-one coffees without wondering, oh, are they going to be there? I don't want to like inconvenient to ask and then ask if they're going to be there, and then ask for coffee. Yeah.
I'll second those tools. Those tools are really, really, really helpful. So I appreciate you putting those together.
So for me, this is a bit one slightly different take. Is I'm really looking forward to events where we're outside. There were a few of those that I went to last year, and I find that when people are gathering outside or near one of the waterfronts, right, if you're going to run around New York, you might as well run around and enjoy the good weather as long as the weather is good. So I'm going to be selecting for if there's a room for a little bit of a bonus for ones that are going to take me either outside or to nice sceneries. I think, Nick, to your point, just like use it as an excuse to experience New York, right? So for me, I'm going to try and keep an eye out for that. All the classics, equals events, third series events, all of them are good. I will say, I think I find that events that are well done later in the night, I feel like night events are usually kind of like, get together at a bar. And I think those are fun. But I often find that I actually, after a day of networking and talking, kind of want a more calm scenario where I can kind of just like relax with people rather than just, go up a notch and have to start yelling. So I feel like I'm going to try and keep an eye out for more curated events at night, just wherever they might pop up.
Yeah. And for me, the biggest things I'm looking forward to is I've basically followed my own advice and picked one event per day. But we've got our own event on Tuesday that we're hosting. We got to make sure we plug that. How to win in the anti-climate era. We're going to be hosting a pretty sick panel of at least 4 people. And we're going to have a live podcast. So really, really excited for that again. We were able to do the live podcast last year, and that was a lot of fun. So very much looking forward to that. On Wednesday, the Climate Capital Summit will be at that. This is going to be probably the biggest they've ever done. And Somil and I are really excited to actually be creating some content while we're there in partnership with them. So that's going to be really fun to actually get some man on the street type interviews. If you see me there, you'll be able to see me. I'll be wearing this white Snoopy hat all week. So you won't see my haircut much. You'll just see my hat. And I hope to see you there. Then on Thursday, I think for me, the big one I'm looking forward to is the new Climate Futures one at the New Lab facility. I just really like seeing the technology on display. I think it's super fascinating for me. Like the one of the main reasons I even got interested in climate in the very first place was how fascinating the technology was, and just being able to actually nerd out and see it kind of up close is to me the most fun thing. Just like actually see the physical products that are being built, because climate change is not going to be solved with a bunch of software, unfortunately. So those are the big ones for me that I'm looking forward to. So what topics are you guys most excited to hear about this year at Climate Week? Let's go with Nick first.
Yeah, so already mentioned, a number of us have already mentioned sort of the buzz around adaptation. I think that's super timely, necessary, valid, important, and interesting. Timely and important, it's always been important, but now that we're in a period of the century where our lived experience of climate change is actually becoming a lot more visceral. So there's a direct demand of, hey, we actually need to not only mitigate, as much future warming as possible, but we also need to start to get ready to live with this. We see it coming. We know it's coming. For some stuff that's probably a tiny bit more off the beaten path, and this goes to wish lists and things that I'll be hunting for, and kind of goes back to what I said I would be looking for in some events. I'm always keenly interested in folks that are talking about things beyond carbon dioxide. Not that that's not important. It is the number one driver of warming, certainly long-term warming, but any interesting conversations around methane, nitrous oxide, what have you, that'll definitely be stuff that I'd be keen to see, and will hopefully be privileged in conversations whether or not it's on the agenda. I also just think it'll be really interesting to see how much geoengineering crops up this year, because that's certainly come into public discourse more and climate media more, and there's more startups working on it and more people investing in it and researching in it. And I don't just mean purely solar radiation management. You can also talk about cloud seeding and whatever else. So that's one that I would certainly be keen to hear a lot of conversation about, and we'll see.
Why do you think why are you so excited about the methane piece, or the non kind of carbon piece there?
I just think it's historically dramatically under discussed and also statistically underfunded relative to its warming contribution. It gets methane, for example, gets 2% of climate finance and has driven 30% of global warming to date. So
wow.
Plus it's a very valuable resource, right? Methane is basically natural gas. So theoretically it behoove us to just use more of it on Earth than losing it to the atmosphere.
Okay, got it. Steven, what do you got?
Yeah, I think we'll probably see this already, but sort of this focus on not just energy production, power production, but like the grid. And like what's been really interesting has been public perception, or I guess recognition of like electricity prices. I mean, this is like a recent phenomenon, right? And then like I have friends who don't work in energy and power, and they're like, "Oh yeah, the transmission distribution costs my bill are really high." I'm like, how do you know that? And obviously, like we didn't really talk about it, 2 years ago in these climate tech, yeah, gatherings. But maybe in like Clean Tech 1.0, sort of that kind of vibe gatherings there was. So I'm happy to see that because it's an important part of decarbonizing the energy system, electricity. And then maybe a sort of curveball one is uh, mixing the other big event that's happening, which is all the like people at UNGA talking about the development goals. And um, I just didn't, the last couple of climate weeks, I haven't seen that much mixing at various events of those people. It's almost like all the climate tech events are like on the west side of Manhattan, and all the UN events on the east side. But I think when I did see that, it was pretty interesting. Even just sort of as a learning experience, right? Like it's like a totally different world. And I think where it did cross over somewhat was like around carbon credits and nature-based solutions and stuff like that. Yeah.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah, I guess I hadn't had a lot of exposure to those. So, Mil, did you had seen some of those last year, right? The UN events.
Yeah. They are kept very separate from each other. I often find that usually everyone kind of expects everyone to stay within a certain vicinity. So to your point about them being different sides of Manhattan, you really are kind of like crossing into two separate worlds. So it's really hard if you're expecting to be at an event for UNGA related stuff at 3 p.m., then at 7 p.m., if you're going to go to an event on more of the climate side that might be more on the west side or more downtown, you lose an hour or an hour and a half in transit. I think it's a very real issue. Something to keep in mind. This is just top of mind. What is it? What is the way to get around that from a space perspective, right? Obviously, a lot of venues themselves are probably being used for UN events. So I wonder if there's even a way to balance that, or if there have to be very specific events that kind of bring people together so that we can use the same spaces.
Yeah, I don't really have any understanding of that world, but my outsider perception is that it just seems like there's a, there's the I don't know if you'd say like the haves and the have nots. It's kind of like an elite class that seems to participate in some of those things, and it's like, well, you're not invited to that, right? I've never been invited to those things, at least. So maybe Somil, and maybe he's got some different parents or something. I don't know. But the point is, I think that it would be a really good point to see those things come together, because we can't just have these people just in suits just talking about this stuff, and there's no connection to the actual people delivering solutions. I do believe there are some people who get invited to these, some of the founders who have really unique solutions who have gotten invited to speak at these. So there are some solutions being talked about. I think, if I'm not mistaken, last year, Liz Dennett, who's actually going to be on our panel this year, she told me that she went to go speak at some of the UN events about their solutions. So there's definitely some crossover, but I feel like it's just very, very selective. Um, I think for me, the core topics that I feel are genuinely under indexed, at least they were in the past. I hope they're not this year. Is, and maybe I'm just biased here because I'm talking my book, but is talent. I think number one, we have to understand how to get the right people into the right chairs to do the jobs that we can actually solve these problems and make outcomes happen. It kind of in many cases felt like just some kind of club that if you were in, and you could get a job with your friends because they had a startup in the space. And then we saw so many companies unable to make it to Series A round because they didn't have the right salespeople in place. They hired based on their friends or relationships rather than based on the skills of getting the job done. And again, I'm a recruiter, so maybe I'm biased, but I think that is extremely important that we focus on getting the right people in these seats. And then secondly, sorry, were you going to add something, Samuel?
Yeah, so can you this is interesting because I think the idea of job seekers at events is sort of this, and I'm happy to be the one outed for this, right? Like the idea of there by being events and there's many job seekers is often sort of a taboo thing, and people like specifically index against events like those. So what's the relationship between there being a lot of job seekers but also the problem that you're seeing?
Yeah, I think that the job seekers thing, it's just a self-sorting thing at the end of the day, right? People who are applying to jobs oftentimes are not the people that you want in the job that you're hiring for, right? As a recruiter, in most cases, the best person for the job is somebody who's not even considering like applying to things. They might be open to a job, but in many cases, you have to convince them to even take the conversation with you, right? The number of times I have to go back and forth with somebody on LinkedIn before they actually have a call with me just to learn about the role is pretty insane, right? So I think that's part of it, and it really depends because you've got a lot of graduate class people where they're pretty junior in their careers. They want to work in climate because they want to make an impact, and I get it and I appreciate it. We need more of that, but the dilemma is the majority of the actual needle movers are people coming from other industries that are not exactly climate industries. They have experience for 10, 15, 20 years in something else, and they can bring their knowledge and Rolodex over to the climate space and make an impact. That's the biggest issue is the people who are job seekers in many cases at Climate Week are not the people that you really want to hire in most cases. And not always the case, but unless you're hosting a really niche specific kind of job hunting or job fair type event, I don't think you're going to get the right people there most of the time. That's my take as a recruiter. I don't know if Steven has any thoughts.
Yeah, I guess one thought I'll add is it is pretty interesting that there's these really exclusive events that you don't know about unless you get invited to, or a friend tells you about it, and then some of these events they just sort of let everyone in, and maybe there's some filtering. It doesn't seem like it. It's not necessarily a bad thing, right? Maybe they view it sort of as a brand building exercise, and also as like a public education, common good thing, right? Maybe you'll have 10% job seekers who are just learning about electrification in this area, but now they're going to learn about it at the end of the event. And I think that's what makes New York Climate Week pretty unique too. Like I go to a decent number of like power and energy conferences, power and electricity sense, and like they're all, none of them are like completely free. Maybe free for students. Yeah, it's nothing like Climate Week where it's like by default you don't charge anything for any of the events. Most of them, so. But yeah, there's a lot of like tricky tensions there. I don't really have any more thoughts on that.
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. I think again, just making the most out of it, especially if you are a job seeker. My genuine advice is you need to have a really specific ask. This is not meant to be a job seeking podcast, but if you have a very specific ask of what kind of role you're trying to get at what type of company, it'll make your life much easier. When you say I'm trying to get a role in climate, it's like the people are going to stop listening unless you have a really specific thing that comes right after that, because there's everybody and their mother is telling you that. So you need to get really, really specific. My final thing that I think is really, really important, I believe Nick talked about this a little bit earlier, is branding and messaging. Like we really, 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 if we want to win at solving climate change and building amazing companies, well, I should say, if we want to win at solving climate change, we have to first build amazing companies, right? And you can't build amazing companies unless you have some kind of value proposition for your customers. You have to be able to make money. You have to make investors money, returns on their investments. So in many cases, the people building in climate need to not talk about climate as the core benefit. It can be a side benefit in many cases, but you have to have a benefit to your customers. So you're going to have to rebrand. And I don't think that the entire industry will rebrand per se externally, because I think we need a way to identify each other. But we definitely cannot continue calling ourselves climate people all the time when like we're working in mining or we're working in critical minerals of some sort or energy, whatever. We have to focus on the industries that we're on, and founders need to get comfortable with this idea of figuring out how do I position myself in the market. So to me, the branding discussion is probably the most important thing that's happening right now, because Nick alluded to it. Again, we're going into next year. We got to figure out like what's our messaging going to be and how are we going to eventually counter on this, kind of political side of things. Well, I appreciate everybody tuning in. We are looking forward to seeing you at Climate Week. Like I said, I don't know if someone else got anything planned, but you'll find me around in my tan jacket and my white Snoopy sitting on the Earth hat. Usually wear a black T-shirt too, so you'll be able to find me.
How long has that Snoopy thing been going on? That's very smart.
This is
like
my second
exactly
year.
like what? Okay.
It's my second year doing it.
Do people remember it from the
I don't
the
know.
past?
We'll see. This will be my second year, so I don't know.
You should have a Snoopy on the Earth pin.
I should do that
Because
because
that's
it's
what
hard.
all the UN people, UNGA people do. They have the SDG
That's
like
true.
semicircle or something.
I should get it because some people can't see the top of the hat. But I even did the whole branding thing. Speaking of branding, I made my LinkedIn picture with this hat on, so hopefully people recognize me. We'll see.
Nice.
Let's see. But this is only my second year doing this as my own business owner, so there's a little bit more freedom. You don't have to be constrained by past employers. But anyways, guys, really looking forward to seeing everybody in person. I'm sure all the four of us will be hanging out a few times, but looking forward to this, guys.
Thanks so much, y'all.
Thanks.